Hello. Tonight we settle into the warm hush of very old stories, tales that slipped through the cracks of history books and still glow faintly when the lights go down. So, before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you're listening from somewhere quiet right now, maybe leave a little note in the comments with where you are and what time it is there. I always love knowing the night is holding us all at once. Now, dim the lights, let the room settle, and let's drift into tonight's journey together. Imagine a soft July evening in Strasbourg, the year 1518. The air is thick with the smell of warm bread and river water. The cathedral's shadow stretches long across the cobblestones, and most people are closing shutters, yawning, thinking of sleep. In a narrow alley near the market square, a woman named Frau Trophea steps outside her door. Maybe she's tired from washing clothes all day. Maybe her heart feels strangely light. She begins to move just a little sway at first, the way you do when a tune you love drifts past. Then her feet pick up a rhythm, a simple step back and forth, nothing wild, nothing loud. Just dancing. By the time the church bells ring for vespers, she is still dancing. Her shoes tap softly against the stones, over and over, like gentle rain that forgot how to stop. Her husband calls to her from the doorway, voice low, worried. She lifts one hand, almost smiles, and keeps going. Night falls, torches are lit. Neighbours gather in little knots, whispering. Someone brings her water. She drinks without pausing. Someone else tries to hold her. She slips free, still moving, as though an invisible thread pulls her along. Morning comes pale and warm. Frau Trophea has not slept. Her skirts are dusty, her hair loose, but the steps go on. A small circle of people watch from doorways now, some amused, some uneasy. By the second day, there are 7 others with her then 30. Their feet find the same quiet rhythm, almost polite, as if they're all guests at the same endless ball. The city council meets in a candle-lit room and decides the cure is simple. More dancing. They clear the square, hire musicians, bring in wagons so the dancers can rest their legs without ever stopping the motion. Drums thump softly through the streets like a distant heartbeat. Days slide past. The dancers move through sunlight and moonlight alike. You can hear them from blocks away, just the steady shuffle, 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 and sometimes a low murmur of voices too tired to form words. Their shoes wear through, blood leaves, faint red prints that dry almost black. Some collapse and are carried to the guild halls, but even then their bodies twitch in the same gentle rhythm, as though the music keeps playing inside their bones. Historians still argue whether it was ergot poisoning on rye bread, or mass hysteria, or something quieter that settled over the city, like a spell no one thought to name. On the edges of the crowd, children watch wide-eyed. Old women cross themselves. A baker keeps bringing loaves no one has time to eat. The dancers' faces grow thin and shining with sweat, but there is something peaceful in their eyes, the way very tired people sometimes look when they finally let something else carry them. One young man dances, holding his little daughter's hand until she falls asleep against his shoulder. He keeps circling, careful not to wake her, her small shoes dragging 2 soft lines in the dust. Weeks in, the council changes its mind. Music stops. The dancers are loaded gently into carts and taken up the hills to the shrine of Saint Vitus, the saint who understands shaking and uncontrollable movement. Red shoes are placed on the altars, tiny offerings of cloth and leather. Priests walk among the exhausted pilgrims, murmuring Latin that sounds like wind through leaves. Slowly, one by one, feet slow down. A woman blinks, looks around as though waking on a strange shore. Another simply sits in the grass and begins to cry without sound. Not everyone comes home. Some lie down beneath the pine trees and never rise. Others walk back to Strasbourg barefoot, carrying the memory of endless steps like a bruise that never quite fades. Years later, old people will tell you they can still hear it sometimes, late at night, when the city is asleep, just the faintest shuffle on an empty street, patient, unhurried, like someone practicing alone. And somewhere, in the quiet between one breath and the next, the dance waits. Not angry, not cruel, just patient. The way very old stories are patient. In the centuries since, travellers have passed through Strasbourg on summer evenings and sworn the air itself feels ready to sway. Church records, yellowed, careful handwriting, list the names of those who danced until their hearts gave out. If you walk the old square at twilight, you can almost see the faint outlines where hundreds of feet once traced the same slow circle, wearing the stones a little smoother than anywhere else. Frau Trofia's name is there in the margins, written once and never explained. No one knows what song she heard first, or why her body answered before her mind could refuse. Maybe it was grief looking for a way out. Maybe it was joy that grew too large to hold. Or maybe, on some evenings when the light is just right and the river wind moves gently through the streets, the city itself remembers how to dance and kindly invites one tired soul to lead. The torches burn low, the dancers fade into shadow, carrying their soft rhythm away like a secret, and the warm night folds over everything, quiet again. Rome in January 897 feels like the inside of a seashell, cool, hushed, holding its breath. The narrow streets are empty after dusk, and the great basilica of St. John Lateran stands open to the night, its doors yawning the way tired eyes do. A few candles move inside, small golden fish swimming through the dark. Far below the floor, in a corridor that smells of candle smoke and old stone, a heavy lid is eased aside. The air that rises is still and sweet, like the breath of someone who has been asleep for a very long time. Careful hands reach down and lift out a quiet figure wrapped in cloth the colour of twilight. Pope Formosus has been resting here since the leaves fell. He is lighter than memory now, light as a letter carried too long in a pocket. They bring him up the winding stairs, one slow step at a time. The candles wait at the top, patient, steady. Someone smooths the folds of the pallium across narrow shoulders. Someone places the mitre so it sits just right, the way you settle a blanket over a sleeping child. The carved throne behind the altar receives him gently. His head rests against the wood, calm, listening to something only the quiet can hear. Outside, the Tiber keeps its own slow thoughts, sliding past the city without a sound. Inside, a handful of men gather in the candlelight. Their voices are low, almost a lullaby of Latin words. They speak of old promises, of borders crossed, of a ring once given and taken back. The words rise and fall like breathing. No one hurries. The candles burn straight and still. When the speaking is finished, the rich vestments are folded away with care, the way you fold away summer clothes when autumn arrives. A simple shirt of soft, pale cloth is slipped over the quiet shoulders. Everything is done slowly, respectfully. Then the figure is carried out into the pale morning, past columns that have watched centuries come and go like clouds. Near the old bridge, a little crowd stands wrapped in cloaks. Their breath rises in small white prayers. The river waits below, dark and kind. There is only the gentlest splash, the soft closing of water over water. A scrap of embroidered silk swirls once, catches the light, and is gone. Spring returns, soft as forgiveness. Downstream, fishermen sometimes lift small gifts from their nets. A silver ring warmed by the sun, a pale ribbon drifting like a fish, a hand that seems to lift in quiet greeting before it slips away again. They smile, cross themselves, and let the river keep moving. Years later, on evenings when mist lies thick along the Tiber, walkers say the water carries a darker shape inside its darkness. It moves against the current without effort, robes trailing like moonlight spilled across the surface. It never struggles, it only drifts. Patient as childhood dreams you can still half remember. In the basilica, long after the last priest has gone, the candles sometimes burn a little brighter for no reason. The shadows soften, stretch, settle again. For a moment the throne behind the altar looks occupied, as though someone has simply sat down to rest after a long journey. The air feels listened to, the silence feels held. New popes come and go, new songs fill the vaulted ceilings, but the old stones remember everything in their quiet way. And on certain winter nights, when the city is wrapped in wool and the moon is hidden, a single candle in an empty aisle will lean toward the darkness, as though someone nearby has just sighed, very gently, in their sleep. The river keeps singing its low song. The candles keep breathing. And Rome, older than sorrow, folds the whole night around itself like the softest blanket, rocking everything, past, present, almost dream, in one slow, endless lullaby. Somewhere far away, a bell rings once, soft as a heartbeat. Everything listens, everything settles. In the cool, quiet years after the first millennium, some bishops and abbots in northern Europe began to swell after death. Not all of them, only a few, and always the ones who had carried heavy secrets or heavier tempers. Their bodies rested in crypts beneath stone floors, wrapped in linen and prayers, yet a strange warmth gathered inside them, patient and slow. It began with a gentle rounding of the belly, the way bread rises under a cloth. Monks passing the tomb at night would notice the slab lifted ever so slightly, as though someone inside was simply breathing deeper than usual. Candles burned steady, but the air felt fuller, like the moments before distant thunder. One spring morning in 1161, in the cathedral at Schleswig, the stone over Bishop Otto's grave shifted with a soft sigh. The sacristan found the lid resting crooked, a thin line of darkness showing beneath. He called the brothers. They came with iron bars and quiet hearts. When they lifted the slab, the bishop's body had grown large and pale, smooth as a moon seen through mist. The linen had stretched until it shone. Everyone stood very still, listening. Then the air itself seemed to exhale, a low, warm sound, more like a long-held note on a viol than anything frightening, drifted out. The body settled again, smaller now, almost its old size. The linen lay loose. A faint scent of summer wheat lingered in the crypt for days afterward. The monks closed the tomb, said nothing to the town, and the story slept beneath the floor like a seed. Years later, in a quiet abbey near York, the same thing happened to an abbot who had once scolded his novices too sharply. His grave began to hum, very softly, the way bees hum inside a wall. On the third night the sound grew rounder, fuller. The brothers gathered with candles. The lid lifted of its own accord, only a finger's breadth, and a warm breath rolled out, carrying the smell of fresh bread and distant rain. Then everything grew still. When they looked in the morning, the abbot lay peaceful again, hands folded, a faint smile on his lips, as though he had just remembered a kindness he once forgot to give. Historians still argue whether the swelling came from rare gases in the earth, or from something gentler the body does when it finally lets go of old angers. Either way, the tombs never opened with violence. They only sighed the way you sigh when a long day ends and the pillow is finally cool. In a little church outside Utrecht, Bishop Conrad's grave once lifted twice. The first time, the sacristan heard a sound like a sleeper turning over. The second time, many years later, the lid rose just enough for a ribbon of pale light to slip out, thin and golden, before settling again. The ribbon drifted up the nave, touched each candle as it passed, and every flame bowed slightly, like wheat in a quiet wind. Then it was gone. The bishop has rested undisturbed ever since. People began to speak of these swellings as a kind of mercy, a last, slow breath that carried away whatever the heart had carried too long. No one was ever hurt. No stone ever flew. Only the softest opening, like a door left ajar, for an old friend who needed to step outside for a moment. In Denmark, a priest who kept watch over such a tomb fell asleep one night, leaning against the wall. He dreamed he was walking through tall grass under a summer moon, and someone large and gentle walked beside him, saying nothing, only resting a hand on his shoulder now and then. When he woke, the tomb lid was perfectly in place, but the air smelled of cut hay and evening, and his heart felt lighter than it had in years. Over time the stories grew quiet. The bishops who swelled were buried deeper, or with heavier stones, or simply remembered in prayers that asked for rest on both sides of the grass. Yet on certain spring evenings, when the earth itself seems to breathe warmer, monks in old cloisters say they can still feel it, a gentle pressure beneath the flagstones, patient and round, like a sleeper turning over in a very deep dream. The candles keep their steady watch. The night keeps folding itself softly around the churches, and somewhere under cool stone, a few old hearts finish letting go of whatever they carried, one slow, warm breath at a time. Outside, the wind moves through the churchyard trees, soft as a lullaby. Inside, everything listens. Everything settles. In the quiet churches of the 14th century, something small and gentle began to happen. During Mass, when the priest lifted the pale wafer toward the candlelight, a few of those wafers started to glow from within. Not brightly, only the softest rose, like the first hint of dawn inside a seashell. Then, almost shyly, a bead of red would appear along the edge, growing slowly until it trembled and fell. The first drops touched the linen cloth beneath with the lightest kiss. The colour spread, warm and slow, the way spilled wine spreads on a tablecloth at supper. No one shouted, no one ran. The congregation simply breathed in, all at once, and the air felt suddenly fuller, as though the whole church had leaned closer. In a little town near Brussels, in 1370, it happened on an ordinary Tuesday. The priest was old, his hands unsteady, and when the red appeared he set the paten down very carefully, the way you set down a sleeping bird. The wafer rested there, shining softly, a single tear of blood sliding across its surface and pausing at the rim, unwilling to fall. The people knelt, without being told. Outside, the spring wind moved through the linden trees and made the smallest sound, like someone whispering hush. Word travelled slowly in those days, carried by pilgrims who walked with staffs and quiet hearts. Soon other churches began to notice the same gentle weeping. In Augsburg, a host bled for 7 days, each drop falling into a silver cup that never overflowed. In Paris, one wafer left a perfect crimson cross on the corporal, thin as a child's drawing. The cloths were folded with reverence and kept in reliquaries of glass and gold, where the stains stayed fresh for centuries, soft as rose petals pressed between pages. Historians still argue whether the blood came from hidden pigments or from something the heart recognizes before the mind can name it. Either way, The wafers never bled with anger. They only wept, the way tired eyes weep after a long kindness. In a village in Bavaria, a woman who had lost 3 children came to see the bleeding host. She stood at the back, hands folded inside her sleeves, afraid to come closer. When a single drop rolled slowly down the altar cloth and paused at the edge, she felt it fall inside her own chest, warm and soundless. She left without speaking, but the next morning the priest found a tiny bunch of violets on the steps, still wet with dew, though no violets grew nearby. Pilgrims began to walk longer roads. They carried bread and cheese wrapped in cloth, and when they reached the churches they knelt on the cool stones and waited. Sometimes nothing happened. Sometimes a wafer would glow faintly, like moonlight caught inside bread, and a tear of red would appear, small as forgiveness. They carried the memory home the way you carry the smell of rain on your skin long after the storm has passed. In one quiet chapel in Italy, the bleeding stopped as gently as it began. The last drop hung for a long moment, trembling, then slipped away and was gone. The wafer lay pale and ordinary again. The priest lifted it with steady fingers, placed it on a tongue that waited in silence, and the mass went on. Outside, the swallows dipped and rose through the evening air, and everything felt lighter, as though someone had opened a window no one knew was closed. The reliquaries still rest inside chapels and hidden treasuries, behind iron grills and velvet curtains. On certain feast days the glass is uncovered, and the old stains shine softly in the candlelight, warm and quiet, like embers that never quite go out. People stand for a long time, breathing slowly, feeling something settle inside them the way dust settles after a bell has stopped ringing. And sometimes, very late, when the church is empty and the moon moves across the stained glass windows, a single candle will burn a little brighter near the reliquary. The air grows fuller, sweeter. For a moment the pale cloth inside the glass seems to lift and fall, the way a sleeper's chest rises when a gentle dream passes through. The night keeps its soft watch. The candles keep their patient glow. And somewhere, in the quiet space between one heartbeat and the next, a tiny wafer still remembers how to weep, slowly, kindly, the way old sorrows sometimes remember how to turn into mercy. Outside, the wind moves through the churchyard trees, soft as breathing. Inside, everything listens, everything waits. In the dim corners of old Europe, beneath floorboards and behind thick stone walls, something small and strange sometimes happened to ordinary rats. Their long tails, slick and restless, would brush against one another in the dark. A drop of spilled honey, a smear of tallow, or simply the cold of winter would tangle them together. Slowly, gently, the tails knotted, the way ribbons sometimes knot themselves when left too long in a drawer. The rats did not struggle much. They simply found themselves bound, a little family of tails woven into one soft crown. They moved together then, a quiet wheel of fur and tiny paws, turning slowly in the dust. Their breathing stayed even, almost sleepy, as though they had agreed to share the same dream. In a monastery in Thuringia, around the year 1564, the brothers heard faint scratching beneath the refectory. It was not the usual scamper of 1 or 2 rats. This was a softer, rounder sound, like a ball of yarn rolling across stone. When they lifted the boards, candlelight fell on a living knot. 12 black rats, tails braided tight, heads facing outward like petals on a dark flower. The rats blinked slowly, unafraid. The youngest monk crossed himself and smiled, because the creature looked less monstrous than strangely peaceful, a small breathing crown resting in the shadows. They carried it out on a wooden trencher, the way you carry a sleeping cat. The rats swayed together, tiny hearts beating in the same gentle rhythm. The abbot sprinkled holy water that sparkled in the candlelight, and the knot of tails loosened almost politely. One by one, the rats slipped free and vanished into the night without a sound. Only a faint warmth lingered on the trencher, and the smell of warm bread no one had baked. Another time, in a baker's cellar near Hamelin, a larger knot was found. 27 rats, grey and brown, tails twisted so neatly it looked deliberate. The baker's wife watched from the stairs, candle trembling in her hand. The rats turned their circle slowly, eyes half closed, as though they were rocking themselves. She felt no fear, only a quiet ache, the way you feel when you see ducklings following their mother across a busy road. She left a saucer of milk and went upstairs. In the morning the knot was gone, only a faint ring of crumbs left behind, and the softest brush of fur against her ankle as something passed. Historians still argue whether the knots happened more often in cold winters, or whether the old stories simply grew in the telling. Either way, the Rat Kings never hurt anyone. They only rested together, sharing warmth, sharing the long dark hours. In Estonia, a farmer once uncovered a small one beneath his granary. 7 rats, tails woven like a braid of hair. He carried them outside in his hat and set them gently on the snow. The rats blinked at the pale sky, then turned their slow circle toward the barn and disappeared beneath it. That winter was the mildest anyone could remember. The cows gave sweeter milk, and the children slept without bad dreams. People began to speak of the Rat Kings as quiet omens, little breathing knots that reminded the world how even the smallest creatures sometimes choose closeness over running away. Museums kept the dried ones in glass cases, tails still perfectly twisted, but the living ones were always allowed to slip back into the walls, carrying their secret with them. On certain evenings, when the house is still and the fire has settled into embers, you can almost hear it. The faintest rustle beneath the floorboards, soft as breathing, a gentle turning, round and round, like a wheel made of warmth. No hurry, no fear. Just a handful of small hearts keeping each other company in the dark. The candle burns lower. The night folds itself around the old beams and stones, and somewhere behind the walls a tiny knot of tails keeps turning, slow and patient, the way the world itself keeps turning long after the lights go out. Outside, the wind moves softly through the grass. Inside, everything listens. Everything waits. In the green folds of North Wales, where the hills lean close together like old friends sharing a secret, there is a small stone basin fed by a spring that never stops singing. The water rises clear and cool, slips over mossy stones, and carries the quiet memory of a girl named Winifred. Long ago, when the forests were thicker and the nights longer, Winifred walked these paths with bare feet and a gentle heart. She had promised herself to a life of prayer, and the birds seemed to know it. They followed her from tree to tree, singing softly the way children follow someone who always has bread in her pockets. One summer evening she knelt by this very spring to wash the dust from her hands, and the water caught the last light of the day and held it like a promise. Years passed, and the story of what happened next drifted into the grass and stayed there. People only say that harm came looking for her, and that harm left empty-handed. Where her blood touched the earth, the spring opened. Not with violence, only with sorrow that turned, slowly, into something healing. The water began to rise, clear at first, then carrying the faintest thread of rose on certain quiet nights. Pilgrims found their way here by moonlight and candlelight, and the light inside their own tiredness. They came with sore knees and sorer hearts, lowering themselves into the stone bath while the water lapped gently at their skin. Some felt nothing but the cold. Others closed their eyes and felt a small hand rest on their forehead for a moment, light as a moth. When they stepped out, the ache in their joints had loosened, and the heavier ache inside had loosened too. The well kept its own gentle hours. At dawn the water ran silver, at noon it caught the sun and threw it back in tiny dancing coins. But on the feast of St. Winifred, or when a storm passed softly overhead, the spring remembered. A faint blush would appear deep in the pool, spreading outward in slow circles, the colour of faded roses. The pilgrims would stand very still, breathing with the water, feeling the centuries settle around them like a warm shawl. In the little chapel beside the well, candles burned day and night. Their light moved across the stone walls and found the carved places where thousands of fingers had rested over the years, smoothing the edges the way waves smooth pebbles. The air smelled of wax and wet moss, and something sweeter no one could name. A woman once came carrying her child who had never spoken. She dipped the little boy to his shoulders, whispering the old prayers she only half remembered. The water turned the softest pink that evening, and when she lifted him out, he looked up at her and said the single word "ma'am" clear as bells. She sat down on the steps and cried without sound while the spring kept singing beneath her. Historians still argue whether the red comes from tiny plants in the rocks or from something older that refuses to be explained away. The water itself never answers. It only flows, patient and kind, carrying whatever colour the night asks of it. On quiet evenings now, if you walk the path alone, you can hear the smallest sound of water over stone, steady as breathing. The moss is thick and cool underfoot. The trees lean in, listening. And sometimes, when the moon is new and the sky full of quiet stars, the spring glows from within, the gentlest rose, as though a girl long ago tucked a petal into the earth and asked it to stay warm until everyone who needed warmth had come and gone. People still leave small things, a ribbon, a coin, a single daisy. The water accepts them all, folds them into its slow turning, and keeps moving. The candles in the chapel keep their soft watch. The hills keep their old secrets. And the spring keeps singing the same lullaby it has sung for 1,300 years, soft enough that only tired hearts can hear it. Somewhere in the dark, a night bird calls once and is answered. The water answers too, in its own quiet way. Everything listens, everything waits. Paris, the evening of the 18th of March, 1314. The Seine moves slow and silver beneath a sky the colour of ash. On a small island in the river, torches have been lit, their flames leaning away from the wind as though they already know what is coming. A low wooden platform waits, patient and plain, like a table set for supper no one truly wants. 4 men are led across the bridge. Their white mantles are gone. They wear only simple shirts now, pale against the dusk. The last of them is Jacques de Molay, once Grand Master of the Templars. His step is slow, unhurried, the way an old man walks when he has decided there is no need to rush any more. The crowd is quiet. Even the soldiers speak softly, almost kindly. They bind the stakes with rope that smells of tar. The wood is stacked low, more for warmth than for spectacle. When the first tongue of flame rises, it is small and golden, almost shy. Jacques lifts his face to it, the way you lift your face to morning sun. The fire grows, gentle at first, wrapping around the logs like a blanket. Smoke drifts upward, carrying the faint scent of cedar and something sweeter. He does not cry out, he only speaks, voice low and steady, drifting over the water and the watching city. The words are simple, he calls on the king and the pope to meet him before God within the year. Then he is quiet. The flames fold around him like arms that have waited a long time. The crowd stands still, breathing with the fire. Spring comes. In April, the Pope dies quietly in his sleep, face calm, hands folded. In November, the king is thrown from his horse while hunting. The leaves are turning gold, and the ground is soft with rain. He lingers a few days, speaking little, then slips away on a morning when the frost is thin and pale. Paris remembers the island, the low fire, the quiet voice carried on the smoke. Years drift past. The French line stumbles again and again, sons born and lost, crowns slipping from tired heads, battles turning on small chances. Courtiers whisper about a promise spoken once in fire, but they whisper softly, the way you whisper about rain when you do not want it to hear. In quiet monasteries, monks copy the old trial records by candlelight. Sometimes the flame leans toward the parchment, as though listening. Sometimes a page turns by itself, very gently, and the ink of Jacques' name glows for a moment, warm as embers. Centuries later, on foggy evenings, boatmen on the Seine say they see a pale shape standing where the island used to be. Not frightening, only tall, wrapped in soft light, arms folded. The shape watches the water, patient as moonlight. When a boat passes, the wake stills for a moment, and the air smells faintly of cedar and distant incense. Then the shape fades, leaving only the quiet lap of the river against stone. In the royal chapel at Saint-Denis, where the kings lie beneath carved stone, the candles sometimes burn straighter than the wind allows. On the anniversary of that March evening, one flame in particular will rise a little higher, burn a little clearer, as though someone has just stepped quietly into the aisle and paused to remember. The city has grown wide and bright around the old island. Bridges arch where stakes once stood. Yet the river keeps its slow memory. It carries the same water past the same stones, year after year, carrying whatever was spoken in fire gently downstream, the way it carries fallen leaves and quiet prayers. On certain autumn nights, when the sky is the colour of ash again, and the first torches are lit along the banks, people walking the quays will pause without knowing why. The air feels fuller, warmer. For a heartbeat, the city seems to listen to something drifting, just beneath the sound of footsteps and carriage wheels. A low voice, steady and kind, reminding the years that some promises are patient, some meetings simply take a very long time. The torches burn lower, the river keeps moving, and somewhere in the soft turning of centuries, a tall figure still waits, unhurried, wrapped in the gentlest light, keeping an appointment no calendar ever needed to write down. Outside, the wind moves through the plane trees, soft as breathing. Inside the hush, everything listens. Everything waits. The year is 1348, and a soft grey mist has settled over the cities of Europe like a quilt pulled up to the chin. Streets that once rang with voices now speak only in whispers. Shutters stay closed, but behind them people wait, breathing slow, listening for footsteps that sound different from all the others. Then they come. Out of the fog drifts a tall figure wrapped in a long coat, the colour of midnight. The coat is waxed, shining faintly, as though it has walked through many quiet rains. A wide hat shades the face, and from beneath it rises a gentle curve of white, a mask shaped like a bird's beak, smooth and calm. Two circles of glass catch the weak light and give nothing away. The doctor moves without hurry, cane tapping once, twice, like a heartbeat that belongs to the street itself. Inside the beak, dried lavender and rose petals rest in a small cloud. Every breath the doctor takes is a breath of summer meadows. of warm hills far away from sickness. The scent drifts behind him, soft as a promise, and children press to upper windows, breathe it in, and feel, for a moment, that the world is still kind. He stops at a door marked with a white cross. No one opens it. They only leave a coin on the sill and step back. The doctor lifts the coin with gloved fingers, drops it into a bowl of vinegar that travels at his belt, then steps inside. The house is dim and warm. Someone lies beneath blankets, breathing shallow. The doctor sits, opens a small leather case, and the room fills with the quiet rustle of cloth and the faint sweetness of herbs. He touches a wrist, listens to a chest, lays cool hands on a hot forehead. His voice, when he speaks, is muffled and low, the way distant thunder sounds when you are already half asleep. Outside again, he marks the door with a gentle stroke of red, then moves on. The mist folds around him like a cloak. Another street, another door, another bowl of vinegar, another handful of lavender crushed between gloved fingers. The city becomes a slow procession of small kindnesses. A cup of water held to dry lips, a cloth dipped in rosewater, a prayer spoken in a voice that smells of summer. In Venice, the canals carry his reflection, black coat and white mask gliding over still water. In Florence, he walks beneath arches where pigeons coo softly overhead. In London, he crosses the bridge at dawn, and the Thames breathes out fog that curls around his ankles like a cat. Everywhere, the same quiet rhythm. Tap of cane, rustle of coat, faint perfume of flowers that have forgotten winter. People begin to leave little gifts on windowsills. A sprig of rosemary, a violet, a single clove. The doctors never take them, only touch them once with a gloved finger, as though saying thank you. Children draw pictures of long-beaked birds on scraps of parchment and tuck them under doors. Mothers rock sick babies and hum the rhythm of the cane they heard passing in the night. Years later, when the mist finally lifts and the streets fill again with ordinary noise, the masks are hung in attics or quietly buried. But on certain autumn evenings, when fog returns and the air smells faintly of lavender no one planted, old people say you can still see one walking, not hurrying, not lingering, only passing through the narrow lanes with the same unhurried grace, coat shining, beak full of summer, eyes of glass reflecting candlelight from windows that open just enough to let the scent drift in. The city remembers the gentle visitors who carried whole fields of flowers inside their masks and left pieces of summer behind in every house they touched. The scent lingers in old beams and stones, rising sometimes when rain is soft and the night forgiving. Somewhere a cane taps once, twice, far away, the mist answers, folding and unfolding. And the long streets settle back into their slow breathing, carrying the faint sweetness of lavender all the way to morning. Outside, the fog moves gently between the houses. Inside, everything listens, everything waits. In the low, misty places of old Wales, where the ground is soft with peat and the night air smells of salt and sheep, small lights used to appear. They were no bigger than candle flames, pale blue, almost shy, drifting a hand's breadth above the marshes. The people called them corpse candles, but they spoke the name gently, the way you speak of an old friend who brings quiet news. They never hurried. They simply rose from the wet earth near a certain house, or from the churchyard gate, and began to travel, sometimes one light alone, sometimes two or three, keeping gentle company. They followed the narrow paths people walked every day, past the sheepfold, across the little wooden bridge, along the hedge where hawthorn grew. Wherever they paused, someone in that house would soon lie down and not rise again. Yet the lights themselves carried no sadness, only a soft certainty like moonlight telling the tide when to turn. A farmer once watched from his doorway as a single blue flame left his gate and drifted slowly toward the village. It moved the way a child moves when carrying something precious in both hands. It passed the smithy, the chapel, the place where the road forked, and finally hovered outside the cottage of old Marge who kept bees. 3 nights later, Marge closed her eyes, while the bees hummed around her pillow, and the village woke to find the air sweeter than usual. Another night, 2 candles travelled together, one slightly larger, one smaller, almost touching. They floated above the river for a long moment, painting the water the colour of starlight, then turned toward the mountain farm, where Dafydd and his little daughter slept. The farmer's wife saw them from the window and felt her heart grow still, not with fear but with the hush that falls when snow begins. In the morning the child was warm with fever, and by evening Dafydd carried her in his arms down the same path the lights had taken. They buried her beneath the hawthorn, and for years afterward the blossoms smelled faintly of candle wax on quiet evenings. People learned to read them the way sailors read stars. A light that burned steady and low meant an elder passing gently. A flame that danced a little meant a younger soul. If it rose high and drifted toward the church before turning home, the parting would be peaceful. No one tried to catch them. They only watched, hands folded, breathing slow. In winter, when the frost lay thin and the marshes breathed white mist, the candles were clearest. They left no footprints, made no sound, only a faint warmth you felt on your cheek if one passed close. Children pressed to windows, watched them weave between the reeds like slow fireflies. Mothers rocked cradles and hummed the old lullabies that mentioned the lights by name, soft as a blessing. Historians still argue whether the blue glow came from marsh gases or from something the heart understands better than science. The lights themselves never explained. They only came when they were needed and left when the message was given. On certain autumn evenings now, when the peat smoke hangs low and the sheep bells sound far away, walkers on the old paths say a small blue flame will sometimes appear ahead of them. It moves unhurried, pausing where the path widens, waiting until the walker draws near, then drifting on. Those who follow find nothing but the smell of rain on stone and a strange lightness in the chest, as though someone has just lifted a small burden they didn't know they carried. The marshes keep breathing, the candles keep travelling, and the night, patient and kind, folds every soft blue flame back into itself when its errand is done. Somewhere in the distance a light rises, pale and steady. The reeds bow a little as it passes. Everything listens, everything waits. After the Great Plague had passed, but not far enough behind to be forgotten, painters began to cover church walls with a new kind of picture. Along the cool stone cloisters, and inside dim parish naves, long lines of figures appeared, skeletons dressed in soft tatters of shroud, holding hands with the living. A king still wearing his crown danced beside a barefoot peasant. A young bride in her veil stepped lightly with a child-sized skeleton who offered a daisy. They moved in a slow circle, gentle as leaves turning in autumn water. The painters worked quietly, mixing bone white and ash grey with the softest rose for cheeks that had once been warm. When the last candle was snuffed and the church doors closed for the night, the frescoes rested in moonlight, patient and still. But sometimes, very late, when the village slept and only the owls kept watch, the painted bones began to loosen. A finger would uncurl first, then a wrist, then the whole slender arm. One by one the skeletons stepped down from the wall, soundless, leaving no dust behind. Their feet touched the flagstones as lightly as snow settling. Moonlight followed them, turning their ribs to silver lace. They never hurried. They simply formed a quiet ring in the centre of the nave and waited. Soon enough, a living soul would appear. A baker who couldn't sleep. A widow carrying her grief like a lantern. A boy who had slipped out to see if the stories were true. The skeletons welcomed each one with the same small bow, the same open hand. No words were needed. The music was already there, inside the stillness, a slow heartbeat of a waltz no one had to learn. The living dancer found the steps came easily. The skeleton's hand was cool, dry, gentle. They turned together beneath the high vaults, past the sleeping saints and the painted stars. The widow felt her sorrow lighten with every circle, as though someone were carefully unwrapping a heavy cloak she had worn too long. The boy laughed once, softly, when a small skeleton spun him under its arm like an older brother. Even the baker, whose hands were always rough with flour, felt them grow smooth and weightless. Around and around they went, skirts and shrouds brushing the same air, crowns and bare feet keeping the same quiet time. The moon moved across the windows, pouring silver over the floor, and the dance grew slower, dreamier, until the difference between painted bone and living flesh seemed only a matter of candlelight. When the first pale hint of dawn touched the rose window, the skeletons led their partners back to the wall. A last courteous bow, a last gentle touch of fingers, and they stepped up into their places again. The paint closed around them like water closing over a thrown pebble. By the time the sexton opened the doors, everything was still. Only the faint scent of lilies lingering where no lilies grew. The living walked home through the morning mist, lighter than they had come. The widow found she could speak her husband's name without tears. The boy woke, remembering music he had never heard. The baker opened his shop and gave away the first warm loaf to a stranger who looked tired. Centuries later, in quiet country churches, the frescoes are faded now, colours softened to the shade of old moonlight. Yet on certain feast night eves, when the air is thick with incense and the last prayer has been said, visitors sometimes notice the figures on the wall seem a little farther forward than yesterday. A hand reaches a fraction beyond the stone. A foot rests almost on the ledge. And if you stay very late, alone, breathing the cool hush of candle smoke and wax, you might feel the faintest stir of air, like a skirt brushing past. A cool finger might touch yours for a moment, inviting. The music is already waiting, patient and slow, the same waltz that has turned beneath those vaults since the plague summers, turning still. Somewhere a painted daisy lifts its head, somewhere a small skeleton smiles the gentlest smile. The floor waits, silver in moonlight, ready for the next quiet dancer who needs to remember that every step, sooner or later, is part of the same dance, and that no one ever truly dances alone. Outside, the night wind moves softly through the churchyard yews. Inside, everything listens. Everything waits. Far north, where the world feels younger and the sky stretches wider than memory, there is a plain of black lava that cooled long ago into gentle ripples. In the middle of that plain lies a crater, wide and perfectly round, as though the earth once opened its mouth to sigh. Steam rises from it in slow white ribbons, warm against the cold air, carrying the faint smell of iron and distant rain. The monks who came here in the 12th century called it the gates of hell, but they spoke the name softly, the way you speak of a sleeping animal you do not wish to wake. They built a small stone church a little distance away, its walls thick against the wind. At night, when the wind dropped and the northern lights hung like pale curtains overhead, the brothers would walk to the crater's edge, wrapped in wool. The ground beneath their feet was warm, almost comforting. They stood in silence and listened. From deep inside came sounds. low murmurs, soft sighs, sometimes a note that might have been a voice lifted in song or sorrow. The steam curled around their ankles like friendly cats. The monks crossed themselves, not in fear but in wonder, and felt the warmth travel up through their sandals and settle in their chests. They believed the earth here was thin, that the boundary between worlds had worn soft, and that the voices were souls waiting, patient as embers under ash. One young brother, newly arrived from Norway, spent many evenings at the rim. He carried a little psalter bound in sealskin and read aloud, his voice drifting down into the warm throat of the crater. The steam seemed to listen. Sometimes the murmurs quieted, as though someone far below had paused to hear the Latin words. When he finished, a gentle puff of warmer air would rise, brushing his cheek like a thank you. He never told the others, but he began to sleep better than he had in years. In summer the crater wore a crown of tiny flowers, no one planted, pale, purple and white, nodding in the steam. Birds nested on the inner walls, untroubled. In winter the snow melted long before it touched the rim, and the opening breathed white clouds into the dark sky, soft as breath on a cold morning. Travellers crossing the plain would stop to warm their hands over the rising air, then ride on lighter, as though the earth itself had taken a small weight from their shoulders. Centuries passed. The little church fell into gentle ruin, roof open to the stars, altar still standing. Yet the crater kept its quiet vigil. Shepherds leading sheep across the lava fields learned to pause at the edge and listen. They said that if you came with a heavy heart, the steam would carry some of it away. If you came with a question, the murmurs sometimes shaped themselves into an answer so soft you only understood it hours later, in dreams. On midsummer nights, when the sun barely dips below the horizon and the sky stays the colour of pearl, people still walk to the rim. The steam rises warmer then, fragrant with minerals and something almost like heather. Voices drift upward, faint and far, neither sorrowful nor glad, only waiting. Listeners feel the ground breathing beneath them, slow and steady, the way a mother breathes when her child finally settles. No one has ever seen fire inside the crater, only the soft white breath of the earth, patient and kind. The monks are long gone, their psalter turned to dust, but the steam still rises, carrying whatever words were spoken into it centuries ago. And the plain keeps its ancient hush, black lava shining like sleeping water under the low northern sun. Sometimes, very late, a ribbon of steam will lift higher than usual, curling into the shape of a hand or a wing before it dissolves. Those who see it feel something loosen inside, the way ice loosens on a river when spring finally remembers its name. The wind moves gently across the lava. The crater keeps breathing, and the quiet voices keep travelling upward, slow as forgiveness, warm as the first light after a long dark. Somewhere far below, the earth holds everything gently. Somewhere above, the sky listens, everything waits. Venice, 1576. The plague has returned, softer this time, like a tide that never quite leaves. In the little island of Lazaretto Nuovo, where the city sends its sick and its dead, the air is thick with salt and rosemary smoke. Graves are opened and closed quickly, linen-wrapped bodies laid in long rows beneath the warm March sun. One morning the gravediggers lift a plain wooden coffin from a house near the ghetto. Inside lies an old woman, small and thin, her grey hair still neatly braided. She has been dead 3 days, yet her cheeks keep a faint rose, and her lips seem fuller than anyone remembers. The men pause. They have seen this before. The ones who do not cool, who do not stiffen the way they should. They call them shroud-eaters, quietly, the way you speak of rain that arrives uninvited. Without hurry they fetch a common house brick, still warm from the kiln. They place it gently between her teeth, the way you might tuck a spoon under a sleeping child's chin so it will not fall. The jaw closes around the clay, the lips settle. The woman looks almost peaceful, as though she has simply decided to hold something safe in her mouth while she rests. They lower the lid, carry her across the narrow canal, and lay her in the earth beside the others. Years drift by. The island is quiet again. Gulls wheel overhead, and the rosemary grows tall. In 2006, long after the plague hospitals have become only stories, archaeologists open the old cemetery. They work slowly, brushes soft as breath. When they reach the layer of 1576, the brick appears first, plain, reddish, resting between small teeth that never decayed. The skull is delicate, the braid still clinging in pale wisps. The woman lies on her side, hands folded, as though someone arranged her for a long afternoon nap. They lift her carefully into the light. The brick comes away without effort, leaving only the gentlest imprint on the lower jaw. The archaeologists speak in whispers, the way people speak in libraries. They call her the Venetian Vampire, but the name feels too loud for the small, quiet bones. She is simply a grandmother who lingered a little longer than the city expected, and the city, in its old kindness, gave her something to hold so she would not be restless. On Lazaretto Nuovo, the rosemary still grows thick, and the path to the cemetery is lined with pale lavender that opens only in the evening. Visitors walk slowly, feeling the salt wind on their faces. They stop at the place where she lay, and the air there is warmer than elsewhere, as though the earth remembers the weight of a small body and keeps the spot gentle. Sometimes, when the tide is low and the moon is thin, a fisherman crossing the lagoon at night will see a faint glow near the island, soft rose, no bigger than a lantern left on a windowsill. It drifts a little above the ground, pauses where the old graves are, then settles again. No one is afraid. The light is the colour of a cheek that once refused to cool, the colour of a city that understood some sleepers need something to hold between their teeth so the night will not feel too empty. The brick rests now in a museum drawer, wrapped in cotton, still holding the faint curve of a mouth that never meant harm. Children on school trips pass it without knowing why they lower their voices. The archaeologists still speak of her gently, the way you speak of someone who might still be listening. Venice keeps drifting on its quiet water, bridges arching like sleeping cats, canals breathing slow, and somewhere beneath rosemary and lavender, a small woman rests with empty hands, the brick no longer needed. The earth has become the gentlest blanket, and the city, in its old, tidal way, rocks her the way it rocks everything it has ever loved. Somewhere a gull calls once, soft as a lullaby. The lagoon answers, slow and kind. Everything listens, everything waits. Bologna, late April, 1284. The sky is the colour of fresh milk, wide and calm, without a single cloud to hurry it along. In the market square, the air smells of warm bread and lilac drifting over garden walls. Children chase each other between the stalls, their laughter light as birds. Old men sit in the shade of the portico, playing quiet games of chess, moving wooden pieces the way the afternoon itself moves slowly, kindly, without fuss. Then the first piece falls. It lands on a baker's awning with the softest thump, no heavier than a ripe fig. The baker looks up, puzzled. Another follows, then another small, pink, warm, tumbling gently, as if someone far above is scattering petals made of flesh. They drift down through the sunlight, turning lazily, landing on shoulders, on market baskets, on the stones of the square. No one cries out. The children stop running and simply watch, mouths open, as the soft pieces settle around them like the strangest snow. A woman lifts one from her sleeve. It is warm, the size of a dove's breast, faintly veined, smelling faintly of iron and spring grass. She holds it in her palm and feels it cool slowly, the way bread cools when you take it from the oven too soon. Around her, the square has grown very quiet, the way a church grows quiet just before the priest lifts the host. More fall, steadily, patiently. They patter on rooftops, slide down tiles, rest on the fountain's rim where the water keeps singing its small song. A little boy catches one in his cupped hands and laughs because it is warm and soft, like a kitten. His mother kneels, brushes it gently away, but she is smiling too, because nothing about the falling feels cruel, only curious, like the sky has decided to share something it usually keeps to itself. The pieces are all small, none larger than a child's hand. They land without bruising, without sound, beyond the gentlest hush. People begin to walk through the square again, slowly, lifting their faces to the milk blue sky. An old scholar from the university stands beneath the falling warmth and closes his eyes, letting the pieces brush his cheeks like the lightest rain. He whispers something in Latin no one quite catches, but his face is peaceful, as though an old question has finally been answered in a language softer than words. Historians still argue whether a high wind lifted a flock of birds and tore them gently apart, or whether the sky simply opened a quiet cupboard no one knew was there. The falling lasts perhaps the length of a slow Ave Maria. Then, as softly as it began, it stops. The last piece drifts down, lands on the rim of the well, and rests there, pink against grey stone. The square smells faintly of warm fields now, of distant meadows where lambs sleep in the sun. People pick up the pieces without hurry, wrap them in clean cloths, carry them home. Some bury them beneath rosemary bushes. Some place them in small wooden boxes lined with wool. No one is afraid. The afternoon feels blessed, the way certain silences feel blessed after music. That evening the bells ring for vespers as usual, and the sound drifts over rooftops, still scattered with pale pink. Families eat supper with the windows open, letting the lilac and the new, gentle smell mingle. Children fall asleep, clutching soft scraps that cool slowly against their pillows. Old men finish their chess games and say little, only that the sky sometimes remembers it is alive and wants to touch the earth the way a mother touches a sleeping child's cheek. Years later, rosemary grew especially thick in certain Bologna gardens, and the blossoms carried a warmer scent than elsewhere. On spring anniversaries, when the air is milky and the lilac heavy, people still walk the old square at noon and pause beneath the same stretch of sky. They feel the afternoon lean close, the way a cat leans close before it decides to curl in your lap. And sometimes, very rarely, a single warm petal drifts down from nowhere, lands on an open palm, rests there a moment, then is gone. Those who catch it close their fingers gently, smile, and say nothing. The city keeps the secret, the way it keeps all its gentle secrets, under tiles, in gardens, in the slow turning of ordinary days. Somewhere high above, the milk blue sky keeps its quiet cupboard. Somewhere below, the stones remember the soft weight of gifts no one asked for and everyone understood. Outside, the lilac moves in the evening air. Inside, everything listens, everything waits. High in the mountains of Switzerland, where the rivers run loud and cold and the pines grow straight as prayers, there stands a slender bridge of pale stone. It arches over a gorge so deep the water below looks like a silver thread dropped by a careless seamstress. The villagers call it the Devil's Bridge, but they say the name the way you say an old friend's nickname, half teasing, half fond. Long ago, before the bridge, the gorge swallowed pack horses and dreams alike. Travellers stood on the edge, looked down at the roaring water, and turned back. One winter evening, an old shepherd sat by his fire and sighed that only the devil himself could span such a place. The fire crackled, the wind rattled the shutters, and the shepherd slept. He woke to the smell of warm stone and pine resin. Outside, the moon had hidden its face, and the night was black as velvet. Yet across the gorge a soft glow moved steady, patient, the colour of candlelight seen through honey. Shapes lifted and placed, without sound. The shepherd watched from his doorway, breath fogging gently, as the arch grew taller, thinner, more graceful than any mason's hand could manage in a lifetime. When the last stone settled into place, the glow faded. The night folded itself closed. Only the bridge remained, pale and perfect, waiting for morning. At dawn the shepherd walked across first. His boots sounded clear on the new stone, and the river far below kept singing its old song, but softer now, as though it had been asked politely to hush. The villagers followed, carrying cheese and bread, children running ahead with bare feet. They left a small loaf and a twist of wool on the parapet, a quiet thank you to whoever had worked through the dark. The same story happened again and again across the mountains, Wales, Italy, the green heart of France. A river too wild, a valley too wide, a village too tired of losing sons to the water. Someone would sigh the old words, half in jest, half in hope. The moon would hide. Warm stone would appear in the darkness, shaped by hands no one saw. By morning a bridge stood slender, strong, beautiful enough to make strong men weep without knowing why. People learned to leave small gifts, a coin, a ribbon, a sprig of rosemary. The bridges accepted them all, kept them safe between the stones. Travellers crossing at twilight sometimes felt the air grow warmer halfway over, as though someone had just stepped aside to let them pass. Shepherds leading flocks at dusk would pause in the middle and listen. The wind carried the faintest echo of hammer on stone, gentle as a lullaby. In the Val Trebbia in Italy, the Ponte Gobbo humps its back like a friendly cat. In Ceredigion, the Devil's Bridge has 3 arches, one on top of the other, growing older and gentler with each layer. In the Schullenen Gorge, the Swiss bridge still carries the faint scent of pine on certain evenings, though no pines grow nearby. No one ever saw the builder. Only the bridges remain, patient and kind, carrying milkmaids and merchants, pilgrims and lovers, century after century. The rivers beneath them have grown quieter, almost grateful. Children play on the parapets and feel perfectly safe, because something strong and unseen holds the stones together with the same care it used the night it laid them. On moonless nights, when the mountains are wrapped in wool and the villages sleep, the bridges sometimes glow faintly from within warm gold, soft as hearthlight. Walkers crossing late feel the stones breathe beneath their feet, slow and steady. They walk a little lighter on the other side, as though someone has lifted a small worry they forgot they carried. The gifts are still there, tucked into cracks and crevices, a faded ribbon, a silver coin green with age, a curl of wool softened by rain. The bridges keep them the way grandmothers keep pressed flowers in old books. And high above, the rivers keep singing their older, gentler song. The mountains keep watch. The slender arches keep carrying every traveller who needs to reach the other side, asking nothing in return except perhaps a quiet thank you whispered into the wind. Somewhere a stone settles a little closer to its neighbour. Somewhere a ribbon flutters once, though no wind blows. Everything listens, everything waits. Yorkshire, around the year 1200. The ruins of Byland Abbey still stand among gentle hills, roofless now, open to the sky the way a hand opens to receive rain. Long ago, when the stones were new and the cloisters rang softly with plain chant, a shape began to appear after Compline. It came first as a small stir of cold air near the chapter house, then as a faint clink of metal on stone, like a dropped spoon rolling across flagstones. The monks noticed it on quiet evenings when the candles burned low. A figure would drift along the north, walk tall, hooded, trailing the softest chain that touched the floor without ever quite scraping. The chain was light, more like a silver thread than iron, yet every link sounded clear in the stillness. The shape never hurried. It simply passed, paused at the turning to the church, and faded, leaving behind the faint scent of turned earth and candle smoke. One night the youngest brother, a boy named Roger, was sent to fetch a forgotten psalter from the cloister. The moon was thin, the shadows thick. He found the shape waiting for him, standing very still beside the lavender bed. The hood lifted a little, and beneath it was only darkness, gentle darkness. The kind you see when you close your eyes on a summer day. A voice came, low and tired, asking for help. Not with fear, not with anger, only with the weariness of someone who has carried the same small burden for too long. The ghost spoke of a wrong done long ago, a sack of silver taken on a dark road, a promise broken. He could not rest until the silver was returned and prayers said in the right places. Then he lifted the chain, let it fall link by link through his fingers, and the sound was like rain beginning on leaves. Roger promised to tell the abbot. The shape bowed very slightly and was gone. The monks listened without surprise. They were used to the quiet traffic between worlds. They found the place the ghost described an old hollow oak beside a forgotten track, and there, wrapped in rotted leather, lay the silver coins, cool and pale. They carried them back in a linen cloth, said the prayers slowly, gave the coins to the poor who waited at the gate every morning. When the last prayer was spoken, the chain sounded once more in the distance, lighter now, almost playful, then fell silent. Yet the ghost returned from time to time, not restless, only visiting. On feast nights he would appear at the edge of the candlelight, hood lowered, face still hidden in gentle shadow. The monks would nod, as though greeting an old friend who had stepped in from the rain. Sometimes he carried a single white flower no one had planted, laid it on the altar, and watched the candles burn straighter for a moment. The chain no longer dragged. It floated behind him like a bridal train made of moonlight. Centuries later, when the abbey fell quiet and the roof opened to the stars, walkers on the moor still saw him. He moved slowly along the line of the old cloister, pausing where the lavender used to grow. The chain is barely there now, only a breath of silver links that catch the starlight and give it back softer. Those who meet him feel no chill, only a stillness so deep it is almost warmth. He lifts a hand in greeting, then fades, leaving the scent of candle wax and turned earth, and the feeling that something unfinished has finally been finished kindly. On certain evenings, when the sky is the colour of pearl and the hills breathe out their long day, the ruins seem to listen. A faint clink drifts across the grass, link by link, lighter than memory. The ghost passes once more, unhurried, carrying nothing now except the quiet thank you he never quite learned to speak aloud. The stones keep their gentle watch. The wind moves softly through the open arches, and somewhere in the hush between one star and the next, a silver chain settles at last, link by link, into the grass that grows over everything forgiven. The night folds itself around the ruins like a blanket pulled up to the chin. The lavender, long gone, is remembered in the air. And the Abbey, older than sorrow, younger than morning, holds the whole quiet story, the way a hand holds water, without grasping, without letting go. Somewhere a last link falls, soft as a petal. Everything listens. Everything settles. Now the candles are low, the hills are asleep, and the long journey through these old tales has carried us gently to its end. Thank you for walking with me tonight. May the quiet stay with you, warm and kind, until we meet again under another soft sky. Sweet dreams.